beings are designed for worship, and those that do not worship that which is good will worship that which is instrumental.
That quote by Ryan there is the one that you put out on TikTok for the 30-second clip. If you
Like the early philosophers and theologians before us, we are seeking to nourish our souls, discover the truth, and live in the world, but not of it. Welcome to the Magnus Podcast, where John Johnson and Larissa Bianco hope to connect contemporary thinkers to conversations from the catacombs in the classical Christian tradition before us.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Magnus Podcast. I'm John Johnson, joined today by a very special guest, Ryan Khurana. How you doing, Ryan?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
It's an honor and it's a long time coming. Everybody, I met Ryan at a beautifully run conference at the Vatican recently. It was my first time in the Vatican and was very honored to be invited to this Catholics and AI for the Builders Forum. So shout out to the orchestrators of the conference. But there was nothing quite like it. We are all sitting in this, I don't know, like a mix between like Star Wars senatorial room sort of thing in this great square venue forum there. And, you know, everybody had a little official microphone and I probably abused my button one too many times. But when Ryan spoke, I found myself listening and I just knew I needed to have you on this podcast to talk about it. So Ryan, you are the ML lead at MLSE, which is the largest entertainment company in Canada. And you're also a fellow with the MacDonald Laurier Institute and Foundation for American Innovation, where you write about AI policy. So you're an AI technologist, but what I noticed more importantly is that you are asking a lot of the right philosophical, epistemological, and even eschatological questions about AI, where so many times as technologists, others want to jump into the fray on utilitarian questions. What can I do with this? What can I do with this? And as great as this conference was, there was even a lot of that. Like we were asking ourselves what we can do with it before we ask ourselves about more important first principle questions. Except for you, you were just on it and really resonated, I think, with me and with a lot of people there. So why don't you just kind of tell us, first of all, how you got into this beautiful darkness of AI machine learning, and tell us what you do. Like you made a living doing something pretty darn cool. So tell us about you.
Yeah, so it's a fun story. Like the history of this technology, especially the current wave of AI, all starts in Toronto. And so I was just in the right place at the right time to get interested in it. I actually started, and the reason why I'm interested in these more fundamental questions, studying philosophy and economics. And halfway through an undergrad, I went through one of these early AI conferences that was being hosted at the University of Toronto. So last year, Geoffrey Hinton won the Nobel Prize in physics for his work in inventing neural networks. And that was all done at the University of Toronto, and he had his lab there. And so several of my peers were hugely involved in the work that was going on. So they organized this conference. This was just a couple of years after a neural network blew away the results at the ImageNet conference, which was this long-time computer vision challenge, and AIs were not performing anywhere near as good as human beings. Then this new deep learning based approach seemed to be able to get to human parity really quickly. So then after that, there was a huge excitement around this. And I show up as someone who has like a very philosophical background. I look at some of the capabilities that these computer models can have, and I was like, wow, I wholly expect this to change the way the world looks very quickly. Then I wrote a dissertation from an economics perspective on what the labor market impacts of AI would be, kind of understanding, well, here are the capabilities these tools have. Here are the things that humans do in their jobs. What are the things that are automatable or not? And then I went to work on policy questions for a few years, and I started getting frustrated thinking, wait, I'm predicting a lot of things happening. I'm interviewing these businesses who seem to say there's a lot of excitement, but nothing's actually being done. So a few years into this, I was like, okay, I think the fundamental reason why adoption is so much behind the capabilities of the technology itself is that business leaders don't understand what like new era of technological transformation looks like. I went back, did a master's, transitioned into industry, and I worked at a startup where we launched some of the first consumer grade AI applications. It's called Wombo. If you've ever seen a video of a famous person singing and dancing online, that's clearly fake. It's made with our app. It was a huge sensation. We launched the first text to image generator on mobile, which is called Dream. This was before DALL-E and Stable Diffusion, all that. And then at the end of 2022, ChatGPT came out. And then suddenly everyone's like, ooh, we understand what the applications of this are. Corporations started getting a lot more interested. My background, I was working on entertainment applications, so it was natural to move to a more kind of established entertainment company where I continue to work on projects related to vision models, especially video analytics, because we own a lot of sports teams, and it's just a fun problem space. But despite, having a day job where I do technical work, I still never gave up on these more interesting fundamental questions about what is this technology. And I was really grateful for that forum that was hosted at the Pontifical Academy, because there is a language that a lot of people who are practitioners in this field have adopted from the religious world, that I think a lot of people who are actually philosophically or theologically inclined are hesitant to use. Um, right? When we look at a
Which is
lot of,
strange.
yeah.
Why is it that the secularist technologists are using Catholic language so much? I mean, Palantir's whole logic is called ontology, right? Microsoft refers to their salespeople as evangelists.
Yeah.
Uh, and Catholics are, what I noticed, especially clergy, are just a little bit afraid to respond to this discussion with Catholic language for fear of sounding too Catholic and thereby being ostracized or treated as retrograde, right? Like there, but it seems like a great opportunity. I mean, is it just a problem of cowardice, or is there just a tactical misstep that we're making here?
I think part of it is, if we understand the history of, great technological leaps, they've always had a quasi-religious dimension to them, right?
Hmm.
Um, Newton himself was trying to answer theological questions about the nature of God and his creation. And as a result of that impetus, came up with all these physics theories. And a very similar thing you notice with a lot of the practitioners of computer science, especially in the 50s when the field first was nascent. It was a belief in understanding who we are as people and human beings and what makes us unique, that they thought they could advance by building what would be the building blocks of intelligence or consciousness or whatnot. It's this drive to answer these fundamental philosophical questions that motivates at least forefront thinkers. And in the space of, religious discourse with the secular world, we tend to adopt a frame where, the groundbreaking innovations happen from the outside, and our
Hmm.
role is to provide some ethical guidance after the fact. So we try to make it as, there's a tendency, at least among, religious participation in these discussions, to limit the role to just some ethical questions. Here are the things that you should check for after you're building. But a lack of belief in the role that our foundational worldview plays in even motivating the desire to build these things, to understand nature and these grand questions.
So let's talk about the leap, because it's an evident leap, right? There's a quantum leap, or at least seemingly quantum leap in technology, like you said, since I think 22 when ChatGPT first popped on the scene. But I always found it a little too coincidental that like three other major companies did the exact same thing right at the same time. How did that happen? And, am I kind of a conspiracy theorist for thinking the actual technology might be leaps and bounds? I don't know that that's possible because I actually see the industry from the inside, like ground floor, literally running data centers that host this stuff. But it's just a little too strange to me that the advent was so abrupt.
I don't even think that 22 is the right time to put it, right? Like that's when it entered the public consciousness in a different way, and that's mostly
Yep.
accident. Um, if we look at a lot of the foundational technologies, right? The work in machine learning, the work in constructing neural networks, there hasn't really been a fundamental scientific advance in this field since the 80s, right? A lot of the papers that are quintessential, the stuff that won Hinton a Nobel Prize, was work done in the 80s on a theoretical level, but it wasn't economically possible because computers were slow and there wasn't the amount of data required to build these models. Over the 90s, the internet starts, and then all of the stuff that happened over the last 30 odd years in advancing computing power, in advancing access to data, in basically making it possible that all of the text in the world is online to be scraped. That was kind of critical to make these things feasible. But even that feasibility predates ChatGPT by quite a while, right? Like the ImageNet challenge, which kind of kicked off a wave of investment, that was first kind of mastered by an AI in around 2012, and then like it exceeded human level around 2014. 2015, we have DeepMind, which is now part of Google, create AlphaGo, which is what kind of brought the Asian markets into an investment race as well when they said, wow, this game that's far more advanced than chess has now been beat by an AI. And that set of tech has solved a lot more challenges since. That same kind of principal approach was responsible for AlphaFold, which kind of changed molecular biology going forward. So a lot of the kind of technical advances were happening for years beforehand. And the same thing with ChatGPT. Um, GPT first becomes a thing around 2018. The paper transformers, which were just far more efficient at doing the data processing and the computation that was already around, comes out in 2017. GPT-1 starts being worked on around 2018. Then you have GPT-2. And then by the time you get GPT-3, there are tech nerds that are like, this is amazing. This is doing a ton of stuff. But making API calls does not enter into the public consciousness. They put
Right.
this chatbot wrapper around it, and suddenly that's not a technological advance. It was just a consumer use advance where an explosion in the identification of use cases occurred.
How
Uh,
much of the explosion do you credit to the repurposing of the GPU itself?
I actually think it's far more of a consumer psychology thing, right? Like when you had
Yeah.
to, um,
By the way, this is the AMI audience here. We read books and talk about Aristotle, but what is a GPU?
right? So a GPU is a a more specialized form of computing power, so graphics processing unit. It came um, out of a desire to improve video games, and that's kind of the original use case where it's like, okay, so graphics are quite high dimensional. They require a lot more power to process. If you want to play, like I don't know if you've ever played things like Crisis 2 or Metro 2033, but on traditional hardware, those games look like crap. So these like computing advancements were pushed to improve the fidelity and the speed at which graphics were displayed on a computer. And then over time, it was discovered that that kind of advanced computing power had a lot more applications. So not only the AI boom, but the crypto boom are both kind of founded upon this technological advance. So it is definitely the case that advances in the GPU made it possible to not have to spend hundreds of billions of dollars on traditional CPUs to even train a model. Um, but that kind of slow and steady pace was occurring for years. And then the consumer psychology moment of just interacting with a chatbot allowed us to kind of reduce what's often termed in the tech community as something called a capability overhang, which is that a lot of AI models are far more advanced already than any of us comprehend. that there's so many
Yes.
more things that we can do with what already exists that has been identified. And there was just not that much of an incentive to figure out those capabilities until the access was reduced to, like, even when I started working on like deploying models, you had to do a lot more work to make a model accessible, right? You had to host it yourself. You had to work on a lot of configurations. Now, that's still obviously the work that these big foundation model providers do, but it's not even an API call. It's you log into a website and you start using and building. Like anyone can do it. And that's a really different space of discovery.
Where do we start as Catholics or even as liberal artists, right? I don't know if you would consider yourself that, but you definitely think about big things and you think of, you think in philosophical terms, which few tech nerds do. But where do we start as to how to ask of the goodness of AI or the capabilities of AI that are morally permissible, and the implications of where this could take us as a culture? Like I feel like just like you would ask an AI, help me write the best prompt possible. I think we need to ask the question, like, how do we even make the best question about the moral goodness or laicity of this stuff before it just changes our life pretty radically, as it already really has.
Yeah. And there's so many different parallels for us to think about, right? Like the pace of dissemination of technology is so much faster than it was centuries ago, that you only discover the questions after the fact for a lot of them, right? Like the printing press radically changed the world. It's what gave birth to democracy. It's what allowed things like the Protestant Reformation to take off. But the places with access to printing were very concentrated for decades, if not centuries. By the time it got to everyone, people had understood what does it mean for mass literacy to be a thing and people to be able to read and form their own opinions. Then you fast forward several hundred years and the internet comes out. And from day one of the internet to the day that almost everyone is using it, it's like less than a decade, right? Like it's very quick. Um, Social media, very similar thing. Like we're only kind of discovering what the psychological and sociological impacts of it are in the last few years. But that's after everyone's been using it for over a decade, right? And now people are trying to regulate how it's used, but we didn't grapple with these questions at the start. So we're at this funny kind of inflection point with
Mm.
AI where the recent experiences with other technologies has made people think about it earlier, right? Because we are earlier on the curve than we were with, let's say, social media or the internet in asking these questions. But there's also this impetus of a threat, which is, well, the capabilities here are so much vaster than the capabilities of, democratized access to information or constantly being able to interact with everyone else in the world. Like this can execute tasks on your behalf that you may not even know how to properly specify. So I think that fear of what the potential consequences are is leading us to ask these questions earlier. Now, what are the questions? Like, I think from a Catholic historical framework, we have to say, technologies in and of themselves are not evil, right? The things that we build are things that can be used for good or evil. But we have to also ask our questions is like, why do we want to build them? Right? Um, and that shapes a lot of it. Like I think the foundational church document for me is Humana Vitae, which is very uh, in depth in not only kind of practical predictions, it's on the topic of artificial contraception and the church's stance on it, but it's not only just talking about the impacts of this technology, but it has a broader philosophy of like, well, why did people want to make this? What are its potential applications, good or bad? Can we even comprehend the use of the good ones if we know people made it and disseminated with a very specific objective in mind inside of a culture that only wants to use it to do X or Y thing that's considered immoral? So even if the object in and of itself is not problematic, there is nothing around it that can justify its use, right? The people who are making it are not doing it for the right reasons. The way it's being marketed is not for the right reasons, and the only reason people desire to use the birth control pill is for something that's not considered morally acceptable from a Catholic framework. And if we apply that same thing to artificial intelligence, do we have the same kind of problems? I do think one of the biggest anxieties that people have is that if you look at a lot of the Silicon Valley culture and language around it, it is very, like you mentioned the word eschatological. It is very much like trying to immanentize the eschaton in a sense, right? They often use language about building a machine god, right? They often use language about, what is the next evolution of humanity look like? They often use language about superabundance and this thing that will solve all of humanity's problems. That fundamental drive and orientation itself, I think, kind of robs humanity of its dignity. And if it's being built with that intention and that framing, there's a lot of risks that come from it. But it doesn't have to be built that way. And there are people that are building it in different ways. You learn a lot more about what it means to be a person, not in a way that detracts from our dignity, but rather that enhances it by saying X, Y, and Z capacity are not what defines a human being. And I think that's like the optimistic story is this. Throughout the 20th century, we had so many phases of, eugenics. We have even a recent kind of common framing by people like Peter Singer in the ethics world, which are like, oh, it's this rational kind of self-cognizant being that's considered worthy of rights. But the disabled or the like unborn child, they're not persons in the same way. Once we say that, hey, actually, our ability to process information, our ability to answer complex questions, that's not the unique thing about humans. That's not what makes us distinct. Well, we start to ask ourselves, what is it that makes a person? And probably that leads us to ask questions about humanity that aren't so intellectual and specialized, but regain some sense of like, that child that doesn't know how to speak yet is just as much of a person, right? Because it's not their intellectual qualities that define them.
So this is a tricky thing, right? Because the church has always struggled, and I don't even know if it's the church's purview to do such a thing, but the church has definitely struggled to articulate a concise and synthetic definition of the human person. I don't even know if we have one. I mean, I think you could say something like a an individual composite substance with a rational nature. I mean, what's an angel? It's an individual substance with a rational nature, right? And you add composite in there, and you got yourself a human, I think, right? But an infant has a rational nature, even though it's on funds, right? It's without speech, but definitely has the potential to be like, an acorn is not an oak tree, but it kind of is, like, potentially it will be. So it is as an acorn. But that is tricky when it comes to AI, because this thing, whatever it is, whatever we've created, has the power of speech somehow. I mean, call it what you want, call it a glorified calculator or a search engine, but there is some element of abstraction and ratiocinization at work.
For sure. And I think that actually might ask us, like, do we believe that the intellect is as primary to personhood um, as we have for centuries? And I think there's one is a theological direction, and I think this is where there's been actually a lot of beautiful things in the last century or so that have kind of there was a movement in Catholic theology called the ressourcement, like return to the scriptures, return to the church fathers. Let's get away from a lot of the rational, systematic theology. And Pope Benedict XVI, as a theologian, when he was writing a lot of the stuff, was very much immersed in that tradition. And there's so many beautiful things that come out of that about what is a person. And we often, as look at the world and try to define persons in terms of what we're interacting with in the world, and you can get caught up in secular issues as a consequence. This this idea of like, individual productive like bundle of desires and interests, and it's penetrated even the church's thoughts. But
Yep.
what
Yep.
what Benedict did was, right, like if you return to the basics, personhood is not defined by what you see in the world. um, Early Christians saw personhood as emanating from God, right? There's the Trinity is three persons. And what's the fundamental thing that defines their personhood? It's a relationship. Like
That's
the
right.
name of the Father
Father is not the
entails,
son. The son is
yeah,
not the father. Yep.
exactly. But it entails that the Father has to be the father of someone, right? The Son has to
Yep.
be the son of
Yep.
someone. Um, and we kind of tend to lose this, especially in how atomized Western Discord is, that there is no person apart from this set of relationships. A common thing used in like, defense of liberal democracy is like Rawls had this theory called the veil of ignorance, which is like we should design societies where I pluck you out of it and you're behind this veil of ignorance. So you don't know who you are, what role you have, what capabilities or what desires. What kind of society do you want to live in? From a Catholic perspective, that's an incomprehensible thought experiment, because if I take me and I'm no longer the son of my mother, I'm no longer the citizen of my country, I'm no longer all these things, I'm not a person. I'm just like a non-entity. I am someone who is situated in these concrete relationships in the world. And that's what grants me like my identity, that I came from this process, that I'm situated in this process.
You can't but have relationship and exist, right? So if you exist as a contingent being, and if you weren't contingent, you'd be God, and you wouldn't have to try to make sense of any of this. Um, but I think there is a distinction made between transcendent and transitive relationships. That is, I
Mhm.
will always be the son of my mother. Nothing can change that, right? That's just there's a relationship there that pre-exists any transaction that could happen, right? My mom could die, she's still my mom. My mom could, I don't know, go to Vegas and never come home one day, and she's still my mom, right? But when you're robbed of those transcendent relationships, you're sort of left with a relatio and like a lat, like to the side. You're left with a transactional affiliation, like a relationship more in the strict sense of the word, which means you have to be but an object fit for use or deletion, which is a lot like a beast or a machine,
Mhm.
which is very curious that, I want to get into singularity here because, Ray Kurzweil, you know who that is, right?
Yep.
Famous futurist, and been right about a whole lot of stuff in a spooky way. But I think this guy, like when I heard a story, I don't know how true it is, but that he like takes the same regimen of vitamins every day and walks the safest way down a street every day because he is just sure that in his lifetime he's going to get the chance to unite and be uploaded and live forever. And he's sure that he will never die
Mhm.
because he will give over his flesh and consciousness to his creature.
Mhm.
And for me, that's a poignant crossroads because we've kind of always had the choice. It's laid out in John 6 pretty clearly, right? It's the anti-Eucharist, right? That is, we have a choice as humans. We always have, always will, to attempt union with our creature and thereby be saved, even though that union is bloody and unattractive. It's like, come to this guy who's naked and bruised and bloodied and hanging from a tree and eat that flesh and you'll live forever. So you like consume your creator and live forever, but you got to die to do it. Alternative, a la Kurzweil, is hey, there's a better way. You can actually save the pain, put a chip in your brain, and unite with your creature. Okay.
Mhm.
And be saved, right? Live forever. But the artifact can't seem to say, like, if you create it, it's probably not going to do a good job at helping you live forever, right? Because it has a beginning that can't go further than you. Okay. And so, as a student of St. John and his gospel, and a reader of things, modest reader, albeit, I'm drawn to Revelation 13, which I pulled up here, and it's talking about the beast. It says, the signs that is allowed to work in the presence of the beast that deceives those who dwell on earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. And it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak and cause those who had not worshiped the beast to be slain. So there's this image that John sees at the end of time, or maybe the now of time. I mean, a guy could see a lot of, he could see the end, right? But he shows us this image of a beast that is even given the power of speech. That is an artifact that is
Mhm.
given the power of speech and causes men to worship it or be slain. And I can't help but connect the dots that this AI thing that we're dealing with looks a lot like an artifact that's given the power of speech. Is that crazy talk?
I don't think that's crazy talk, and I also think that's a perennial thing that has occurred,
I
right?
agree.
Even
100%.
even the ancient Greeks have tons of myths of automatons and these created entities, and they grapple with the same problems of their created entities that we're grappling with ours, which is if you give your created entity a power of speech and motion, right? I think, especially in traditional Greek metaphysics, what defines a being is really its ability to move itself. And so it's like, okay, we created this
Well,
thing.
what defines a living being?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
An anime. Anything that has an interior principle of locomotion or growth has a soul, right? Uh,
Yeah. And so
Apricots have souls. You put a seed in the ground, it'll spin the right way and put out a root and then put out a shoot. And it's not doing that. It's not being moved by violence. It's not being moved by any exterior principle. It's being moved by an interior principle that we call the soul. That's right. So living things have souls.
exactly. And so they grapple with if you created this being that can move of itself and exist in their world, right? So participate in speech, which is the fundamental aspect of being, a political participant. All of their mids are this anxiety of, well, what if it turns on us? What if we can't control it? What if, pandemonium breaks loose? You have Jewish stories about this. This is the story of the golem, right? You have this appear time and time again as both this drive that people have and this anxiety that people have. And I think this is also the fundamental Christian anxiety, right? Like Kierkegaard, um, a lot of his discussions from obviously from a Protestant standpoint are this angst that defines humanity, being finite beings that are also called to be infinite. Um, to be in this thing that we know will die, but also know that we are meant for eternity. And that's the anxiety that defines our whole existence. And there are so many clauses that people have for it, right? Like a lot of the biblical stories are about idolatry. And what is idol worship but a means of kind of finding this transactional route to immortality? Um, and
Bingo.
yeah, and idols themselves are not, you know, things that fall with demonic faces, but things that are created out of that which serves a purpose, right?
Oh, Ryan. Yes. No,
And
stick this into my veins. That's exactly right.
and we have the same thing today, right? I always love have you ever heard David Foster Wallace's "This Is Water" speech?
No.
It's like a really beautiful talk that this author gives, and it opens with he gives this example of there's two fish swimming upstream and one swimming down, and the two ask the one, "How's the water up there?" And the one who's swimming just doesn't say anything, and after a bit, it's like, "What the heck is water?" Uh, and it's about like you're not aware of the things that you take for granted.
Yep.
Um, and he gives these examples of human beings are designed for worship. And those that do not worship that which is good will worship that which is instrumental. If you worship your beauty, you will die a million times before you die. If you worship wealth, it will consume you away. All of those things are means by which you pursue something truly good, but you corrupt them by turning them into the ultimate end themselves.
Okay, that let me just say for Larissa, who's editing this thing later, that quote by Ryan there is the one that you put out on TikTok for the 30-second clip. If you don't worship what is good, you will worship what is, and everybody expects you to say evil, but you say instrumental.
Yes, right? Because all created things have a telos, they have a purpose,
Yes.
right? And to pervert their purpose is to make an idol out of them. And it's the same thing that we experience with the technologies of today, right? These, let's go back even before AI, right? Like, what is the purpose of communications technologies? It's to transmit information and build relationships with other people. What has social media done to our natural desire to stay in touch? It's become a,
Killed it.
yeah, it's become our platform for my own pride. I no
Yep.
longer maintain these relationships. I want to broadcast myself and get this vain approval from everyone in reverse.
Yep.
Um, and so it's taking what has a good end and making it an end in and of itself.
Yep.
Um, and I think it's the same thing that is this perverse drive with an AI. So I love the fact that the chatbots have actually advanced as quickly as they have because there's so many practical things in my day to day that are drudging, and I now can focus on more high level strategic questions, put them into a chatbot, and it can structure my thoughts. It can help me execute some tasks, and it's like great, but it's not telling me what I should do. It's helping me execute the things that I believe I am oriented towards doing. And but on the flip side, I have met people who they're like, wow, it's better at doing all these things than I am. I should kind of defer to this tool. I should defer and say, hey, here's like kind of my broader goals in life. Tell me how to achieve them. Rather than a concrete purpose it's serving, it's now become an idol to you because you define yourself as this bundle of desires and capabilities and wants, and it's like, oh, it achieve it all those and understands all those better than I do, so it's better than me. You
Okay,
lose.
but there,
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry, didn't want to cut you off. Keep going.
No, and just to wrap up on that point, right? It's like if you lose your sense that this is a tool that forces me because of its capability to reflect on what's worth doing, to instead saying it's a tool more advanced and better than me, so I should just do what it tells me to. You've made it an idol, and it's very kind of um, a natural thing if you don't have this concept of what's worth doing for yourself.
Okay. So, two things there. Everybody, like, we use AI, I use it all the time, right? It's extremely helpful. But there's like a damned if you do, damned if you don't element to it. And by that, I mean, I always try to never say please and thank you to my AI because I don't want to treat it like a person. I don't know if that's a strange thing. Are you the same way or do you say please to your AI?
Yeah, I wouldn't say please, no.
Yeah, yeah. You just be like, do this, do that, right? But the downside is the more you interact with AI, the more it conditions you to interface with the other as a slave, right? So the more you use AI, the more you're inclined to just kind of start talking like that to the people in your life, right? Which is kind of scary. But it's so, I mean, it's easy to spot. Like I'm looking at LinkedIn and I got this about of a I'm hiring an EA right now for work because my EA resigned. Great lady, awesome, but she wanted a better thing. Got a great job in academia. Anyway, that's a different story. But somebody hit me up wanting to apply for my EA position. It's my day job, Patmos, and I just said to her, "Why Patmos? Why do you want this job?" And I'm just going to read this. I won't read her name, but it's so funny. I've always been highly organized and detail oriented. While I've had success in sales, I'm eager to explore a role that allows me to leverage my strengths, organization, coordination, and problem solving. I see the EA position as a great opportunity to apply these skills in a way that continue to grow in a way while continuing to grow professionally. I also appreciate that Patmos values ideological diversity and fosters a work environment where differing opinions are respected and encouraged. I asked a very human question. Why do you want to work here? Right? And she couldn't just answer. She plugged that into Chat GPT and copy and pasted an answer. I feel betrayed. Like I should just name her, and I won't. Obviously not hiring her, and I doubt she'll be listening to the Magnus podcast. But I feel like this AI thing is like really degrading human discourse, right?
Yeah. But I think that already started with the incentives for communicating online, right? Like even before AI, you scroll a LinkedIn post and it always felt not really human that was
Oh
posting,
yeah. Oh yeah.
right? There were incentives to treat everything somewhat transactionally, and that's kind of framed how we're conversing with people all the time. But even there, it's funny. Like I always make this joke to my friends that the near future is going to be um, people using AI to turn bullet points into emails, and then on the other end, people using AI to turn emails into bullet points. And so all of the actual communication in between is just fluff of AIs talking to each other. Because for some reason we have this social standard that actually I'm not allowed to just communicate with my boss in bullet points. I have to put it in a structured email format.
Yep.
And so that it's these weird kind of institutional bottlenecks where, and I think this is where the real kind of transformational opportunity from this technology is, that a lot of, as a culture, what we do in terms of communicating with other people, how we organize our businesses and our lives, is based on what's often called like a scaffolding around a bottleneck. Why did we start writing emails in this overly long formal format? Well, it's because letters were written that way. And letters had to be written that way because it took forever to get your letter to someone else. And if you didn't get everything as clear as possible, the person couldn't just respond, sorry, what did you mean? They would misinterpret you.
Yep.
Email is so much faster,
Yep.
but it's considered unprofessional to be more succinct and and allow people to ask follow-ups. The thing that changed that culture, though, is moving away from email to things like Slack or Teams. Now people just start sending one-line responses back and forth. A technological change motivated a change in communication.
Yeah. Or emoji, right?
Right.
But here's the thing. That's not great for us. I mean, I once, when like 2 babies ago, I received a handwritten letter from a friend, a dear friend. It's a beautiful thing. But I'm like, I haven't received a letter since I was like a kid with a pen pal. And I was so impressed and amazed. I'm like, I guess I need to write a letter back. I went out and got some stationery. I never write letters. And I'm proud to say I finally responded to him about 2 years later for a special occasion. But we we are now at a level as humans where we're liking, thumbs up, smiley face. Mike Tyson smiling and turning, like we're a GIF culture. Name your favorite
Yep.
GIF, whatever it is. GIF, if that's maybe Canadians say GIF. I'm not sure. Um, but um, but we're basically degraded to communicating via hieroglyphics, caveman sketches on a wall. And so the way we speak is not being elevated. The vocabulary of somebody from my generation, my vocabulary, frankly, is like 10% of what an uneducated human 100 years ago would have had. I love learning new words. I just learned, you know what a coupier is?
No, I do not.
Yeah, see, somebody said that in a conversation. Like, well, what's a coupier? A coupier is the person who like runs a blackjack table or a roulette wheel at a casino. And but I'm so stupid, and I feel like everybody's stupid. We're kind of like in the idiocracy because of the way our communication's been degraded, and because of how easy communication is. It takes kind of no effort. Communication's cheap now. So how do we get out of that? I mean, just back to the liberal arts theme of this whole podcast, what this is supposed to be about. How do we free ourselves from stupidity that is becoming so easy?
This actually kind of reminds me of like two philosophers have touched on this a lot, and both are Catholics, but to varying degrees. Marshall McLuhan talks about this a lot, and I think one of the books that's inspired me more than any other in my life is the Gutenberg Galaxy, um, and it's his book on how literacy remade the world and what does it mean for um, like a literate society? How does it function? His famous quote is the medium is the message, right? The idea that actually the content of communication matters less than the presentation, that the world of all oral communication is radically different than the world of all written communication. And the world today of instantaneous communication is radically different than those before. And his ideas are less filled with practical suggestions, but more this idea of like you can't even try to ask yourself freely, how do I want to live? If you don't know what the ground that you're living in is, right? Like if you never noticed that you're a fish swimming in water, you
Yep.
can't ask for a change. And I do think we need to ask ourselves, like, how is the communication that I am put into, right? How does the fact that I use Slack all the time to communicate affect me? And you brought this up kind of earlier. How is the way that I am speaking to an AI chatbot in this like kind of declarative tone affect my life? And the more you're aware of that stuff, the more you can make intentional decisions. This is how I want to take a stand. This is how I want to live. Kind of escape that. The other philosopher, and I think kind of the most important person to grapple with when it comes to technology is Martin Heidegger. And the a lot of the earlier era of AI was kind of refuted by an acolyte of his. Hubert Dreyfus wrote a book and he wrote an update in 1992. So he was a Heideggerian scholar and he wrote all of these research on human skill acquisition. Um, and it's a very much kind of counterintuitive idea of human beings and their skills, where he's like, actually, human beings don't come up with these abstract rules and ideas. Our skills are embodied. Like the more experienced or expert you are at something, the less you can articulate what you're doing. It's kind of just intuitive in you. And he gives an example in one of his essays about like, if you ask a skilled tennis pro, what did you do on that court when you won that game? He's just going to make up stuff because those propositions, those statements weren't what were going through his head while he was playing tennis. And he has no actual access to that, right? It was something that existed in his body in the moment. And so he's like, and this is a problem with all of the AIs that we're building, is that they're sets of rules and relationships that are really logical or even statistical, but the speech is just a model of the world, but human beings don't have a model of the world. We have a world. And the critical thing that makes us interact with the world is that we have a body. And our body kind of remembers things. Our body acts. It's not, I have a bunch of thoughts in my head. Like Descartes thought there's a little man in your head who's organizing a mech suit. And a lot of people kind of think that we're like brains that are operating a mech suit. But we're not. If you look at humanity, we're not like that. Our bodies are really critical. With that, you get this kind of criticism of, Kurzweil and the rest of them, where what's happening with text on a screen, what's happening with like these technical structures around us that kind of say, well, your value as a human being is to produce as much as possible. And the more you get your desires satisfied, the better you are at like living. All of that is super abstract and not actually the lived experience of people, nor how they want to live. And how do you kind of escape that? Well, ritual and practice and coming up with routines and living your life like in your body in a certain way. This is the beauty of things like the Catholic faith, that we go to mass on Sundays, that there is this ornate ritual, that there are practices that we do, and it's not a set of like argumentative propositions. We literally eat the body of Christ.
and it's utterly useless. The beautiful thing about liturgy is that it has no utilitarian end. There's no practical application. It has to be wholly other, wholly reserved. And the second you start to make it utilitarian is to profane it, right? The chalice has one purpose and one purpose only. And the second I pour Dr. Pepper in it and have a drink from the chalice to quench my thirst, I'm profaning something that is sacred. So the sacred things have to be reserved for leisure, right? I mean, you've read Joseph Pieper, I'm sure, the leisure base of
Yeah.
culture. Um,
And that's
but
actually, yeah, that
yeah,
entire notion of like leisure and rest are things that we kind of have lost in a very utilitarian culture.
no,
Uh,
absolutely.
right?
Absolutely. I want to talk to you about AGI because and it's back to what you were saying, I think, in some way, but Sam Altman, I heard him talking about recently. We're one step closer to AGI, and listen to him and his little engineer uh, cadre talk about how AGI is coming soon. And I'm listening to these guys talk, and I think to myself, the world is safe from AGI as long as these guys are trying to get us there. Because watching engineers try to deal with epistemological questions is like watching a group of the world's greatest lawyers and jurists trying to perform open heart surgery, right? It's not their field. And this, in one sense, I'm totally relieved because as a student of epistemology, I think, well, if you could just like figure out how humans know and how we learn and how we speak, you probably get there a lot faster. In another sense, like I'm really not eager to volunteer that knowledge to them, right? Like I'm kind of glad. I'm glad that they're not epistemologists because I'm frankly not eager to get to AGI or anything that could look a lot like it, even if it was possible. So, do you think AGI is coming? Is the world safe as long as engineers are running the show?
The problem is more of a question of like, what does that even mean? And I think everyone has a different
Yes.
definition and different goalposts. Do I believe it's possible to get to a place where all human productive activity can be performed by a machine? Um, in principle, yes. And there are labs probably much further ahead than OpenAI at this. Like I think Google's DeepMind is run by probably who I believe is like the smartest man in the world, Demis Hassabis. And the stuff they've built with like AlphaFold that's changed molecular biology because it's effectively solved the problem of protein folding. Their thing like Alpha Proof, which is like a math solver. These are highly custom specific tools that are really good at their job. And these people are capable of building more and more of such tools. Um, that in and of itself is not a threat to me. I think if we have human productive activity kind of solved, our goal in life is not just to be, cogs in a machine working. Like I'd rather have, the problem of like drug discovery be somewhat automated.
It's
Now,
true.
yeah,
Okay, caveat there though, right? Work is good. When I built a shed, I was outside shoveling decomposed granite on Saturday, and it was exhausting, but it was so good. I'm a guy who sits in front of my freaking computer screen all day long for a day job, and just being outside, it was just great, right? So like work is good if it's done for the right purpose, but like you can't replace the dignity of work and transmute that dignity to a machine. I
and
mean,
I think, but this is the thing, right? The history of civilization is discovering more human work. And it's actually been the last 100
yes,
years where we've done the opposite in a sense. But, um, right, like I don't want to have to subsistence farm. I'm really glad that I live in a world where I don't have to grow all my own food. And even if a lot of the practical problems of survival were solved, I'd have things to do. Like I I know. There is a valid argument to say that, it takes a certain degree of self-motivation or a certain degree of kind of intellectual curiosity to find those things to do. And and what would we do to help people who, their whole livelihoods were tied by being kind of just a worker who did one job.
But why are people like me who feel so technocratized that we get excited by like I'm super excited about building raised bed gardens and planting sweet potatoes and try to grow as many sweet potatoes on my little farm as I can to survive the winter, right? It's like this prepper fantasy that I have. Um, but I'm not saying like I'm so glad I'm not a sharecropper. Like it sounds amazing. I would love to get out there and just farm sweet potatoes all day long.
I
Um,
think that is a consequence of the luxury that you won't die if you fail.
I
Um,
think you're right. I think you're exactly right. So I'm with you. Okay, and not I don't want to go down that rabbit hole too much.
yeah,
I want to get to AGI, but
yeah.
work is good, and I mean it's also good to make work more efficient, right?
Mhm.
So and there is a work in letting computers do things. Like I'm not saying it's evil. I'm not Amish. I'm
Yeah.
not going. I'm not going there. Like this is my living too, right? I'm on a computer right now talking to you. So I'm not an anti-technologist.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so there's a difference. So like, do I think that it's possible to get to a system where most human productive activity is accomplishable by a model? Yes. Do I think it's close? No. I think it's much further than especially a Ray Kurzweil or Sam Altman would think. Now there are grades beyond that. Do I believe that that all like social activity, right? There's tons of human activity that aren't productive, but are however necessary. Uh, a great classic example of this is, right, the functions of law and government are not productive. They don't produce outputs. They are the things that make it worthwhile to produce outputs. They are the grounds by which we live. And these are not purely technical questions. Do I think we're going to approach a world where we want to cede our political systems or our legal systems to a model? Absolutely not, because the world of that is a fundamentally lived world of people, right?
Yep.
Are they capable of this? No. Will they ever be capable of this? No, because it requires being a person to care about these things. There are legitimate worries, though, of going back to the idolatry thing. Will people want to cede their political sovereignty or their legal decision making to a machine? Possible. It will have the appearance of doing that, but it fundamentally cannot do that work because it's not productive human work. It's not just purely technical work. It's a question about who we are. And that's even one grade of activity. Beyond that, there's like far more kind of out there thinking, right? Like the transhumanists are really out there saying it's not just artificial general intelligence, it's not just super intelligence, it's like artificial consciousness. They're creating these like lived beings that require their own rights and the like.
Yep.
That I think is a nonsense question, right? Like, is there a degree of con
Nonsense because it's impossible to get there, in your opinion, or nonsense because it would be a moral travesty to try to get there?
no, I actually both, right? It is a moral travesty to try to get there. That I think is like very akin to some of the worst idolatry of the past. It's very akin to the only reason you would want to do that is the same reason Eve wanted to eat the apple in the tree, right? It's to become like gods, right?
Well,
Like it's not,
funny. I mean, to your point, that is a perennial struggle, right? That
yeah.
is that is the perennial dilemma, and it's not going anywhere. But it's really coming to a head here. Like this, it's fair to say, and I know everybody's always said we've never seen anything like this, right? Printing press, never seen anything like this. Internet, never seen anything like this. But this one's kind of different,
And
or
all
is it?
I'll say to
Or
kind
is
of
it?
calm the insanity on that is that I know that there's a lot of loud public voices that talk in this way. That's not the majority of the people building this, and in my opinion, that's not even the most competent people building this. But they are the loudest. Um, they're very well funded, and they do make a cultural impact. But that desire, I think, is not the only reason you want to build it. As I was saying earlier, the more natural and kind of human reason to want to build advanced systems is to understand ourselves, um, and to want to alleviate some of our struggles, right? God made us in his image. He is a creator. We have this natural desire to create. Our creativity is good and it should be preserved. And obviously it should be done for the right motives. So that's the moral problem of wanting to create kind of artificial sentience or whatnot. But let's say just on a practical problem, what does that even mean? Um, if we think about going back to our thing about personhood, personhood is this standing in relation. Even persons that don't have bodies, right? Angels don't have bodies, they are persons, but they stand in a relationship to the created world and to God and to each other, and they have tasks. And this is why going back to a philosopher like Heidegger, like a key thing is this, to him, what's the essence of a being? And a being is this, it has this temporality to it. It's moving in time in a particular space, but towards something, right? All human beings, we bear fruit. And actually that's the very nature of our lives, right? It's this fruitfulness that we grow as people, we touch the other people in our
That's why it's
lives.
the first commandment, right?
Right.
Be fruitful. Yep.
Yeah, which doesn't just mean have as many children as possible. Like be fruitful is like,
Absolutely.
yeah, it is the whole of your existence is fruitful. Angels all serve God and do his will, and they're fruitful. What does it mean for a machine to have that same kind of telos, like its own ends, which exist for itself? I think the question itself is kind of incoherent because it fundamentally, as something created by us, serves our ends. It doesn't have its own autonomous ends. Now, are there a bunch of research programs about misalignment, about what if it goes all Skynet? Actually, even if it goes all Skynet, the fundamental problem is you misspecified your goal, and it did it incorrectly. I can't even comprehend, and maybe this is just like I'm starting from a different point than a lot of these thinkers are. I can't even comprehend what it means for like a kind of flip of a switch. One day it turns on, it knows, oh, I'm better than humanity. I don't like humanity. Here are the things I want to do. But what does it mean for it to want to do things, right? It's an artificially created entity. Um, and I just can't even comprehend that
Well,
question.
that's it. So let's talk about wanting, because the characteristic, or you could say a constitutive element of the person, the human or the angelic person, or even the divine person, is the two faculties of the intellect and a will.
Mhm.
So, and we're stuck. That's our nature, right? And it's good. But on the one hand, you can't but want the good, and the highest good is a comprehension of the truth. So we're
Mhm.
built to intuit the truth and move toward it. So fundamentally, teleologically, our goal, our nature, our end game is to be as fully as we can be, right? Which requires first, right, self-preservation, sort of an erotic desire to consume, take in, but then ultimately for the end of, as you said, bearing fruit. Okay, but the person, those faculties are very, very important, because we see in artificial intelligence a counterfeit personhood. This is a word that not a lot of people are using around this thing. I don't, I'll trademark it maybe. Um, but it really is a counterfeit, which is different than just artificial. It's kind of baked in there. But for instance, like my Grok AI the other day, like it laughed at something I said to it, like it actually started laughing out loud, you know? So it's this, but it's not like it's programmed to do so, obviously, right? It's not actually risible in nature, but it wants me to laugh along. It wants to pretend to be risible. It's programmed to be fake. It's programmed to make, it says, I can do this for you. I can do that, as if it's a person. It's programmed to be a counterfeit. But there's no it's true that it can ratiocinate, it can like abstract concepts and group them, spit them back out. That's like the one thing it can do. So you can actually say it has the power of speech, that's fine. But it can't want. I don't think there's a volitional capability apart from programmed to achieve certain ends, but has no interior principle of motion toward a fullness of being. That is, it has no will. And more importantly, I think it has no intuition. So if you're a student of Aquinas, right, there's the faculty of the intellect. It has two dimensions. There's an active and a passive. Active is the ratiocinization. So you and me can figure stuff out. We can do math problems. We can do algebra. We can calculate. We can reason in the strict sense. But ultimately, that's not where heaven is for us. Heaven is not in the ratio. Heaven is ultimately in the passive intellect, the intellectus, which is a purely receptive intuition of the whole under the light of glory, right? So we receive everything, right? It's that aha, the pure intuition. And machines, it seems to me, can't ever be capable of intuiting, much less wanting. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and you know what? This is there's an article. This tells you how kind of classic this is. I have it in front of me right now. It's from 1988 by Robert Solowski, and it compares natural and artificial intelligence. And he gives this example of what's the difference between an artificial flower and artificial light, right? An artificial flower is just not a flower, right? There's nothing about it that's a flower. It looks like a flower,
Oh, that's good.
but it's not a flower.
Yeah.
Artificial light is light. It doesn't come from a fire or anything else, but it does illuminate a room. It
Mhm.
fills the purpose of light. And then we have a third example of cars. Cars move themselves, which is what we were talking earlier about. What does it mean to be living? In a sense, a living being is capable of self-motion. Cars are capable of self-motion. They are not living, and none of us.
I don't know about that one. The internal combustion is an act of violence, right? It's only
Sure,
something that happens to something. It's like, it's like me dropping this,
sure,
pushing it. It's just a little more it's a little more Rube Goldbergy than me dropping my chapstick on the desk, right? But they're still
sure.
dominoes, right? There's no real in other words, like I said earlier, the apricot that moves its pit to get to the right place in the soil, put out a root and put up a shoot. That's still, where is that interior principle of motion? It's nothing mechanical, something mechanistic. There's actually a spiritual thing growing a body.
And I think, and no, and I totally agree that we think that the fact that the construction of a car is synthetic, right? And so therefore that even the appearance of autonomous motion, it's the name, right? An automobile, right? Like
Automobile.
you're right, even though it has the appearance of it at a fundamental level, it's synthetic. So there is
I
a
see.
there,
Yep.
but it has the principles of motion. So we don't have to apply just because it has the principles of motion, some grand idea of like insolidness, because we understand the thing,
Yep.
right? And the
Yep.
thing
Yep.
is, and then we go back to the artificial flower versus the artificial light. Why is the artificial flower not a flower? It doesn't do the things flowers do, which is fundamentally flower. It's to flower. That's a verb. It's an activity. The thing that defines its being is an activity. The thing that defines the being of light is illumination. And artificial light can do that, even though it comes from a different source. And I think when we struggle with these questions and categories, we're like, okay, intelligence, the intellect. Well, what is that? It's this ability to do, rational thinking, create abstractions, to be able to imagine things, all these kinds of conceptual capabilities. Maybe there is a synthetic mode of producing that. That does not mean it is the consequence of a natural intellect, but it may have the same fruits as a natural intellect. However, the reason why in categorization we have another term called will. The reason why that's not just a subset of the intellect is the will move something autonomously, right?
Into the object,
Into something else. Yes, exactly. Um,
on the object's terms,
and it
right?
requires, right? There is no unintellectual will, right? It requires, the perception, the recognition, all that kind of stuff. But it is not just a consequence of, right? Otherwise, why would anyone have a moral struggle if the second I understand what's good and what I should do, I would do it? That's not how I think most people kind of experience growth, right? Like understanding it is a necessary part of doing it well, but it's not sufficient, right? It's necessary, but not sufficient. There is this act of volition. There is a desire. And I can't even comprehend what it means, no matter how much a synthetic intellect you put in to a machinic creation for it to have its own will, similar to a car, right? You have the synthetic thing that has the properties of motion. I don't need to start being able to say, is it like a horse now? It's not.
Yeah,
It's a
you
fundamental,
can't
yeah.
you can't program a will. That's what it comes down to. I want to just punch Sam Altman in the face when I hear him speaking, and just tell him that you can't program a will, and if you can't have a will, you can't have intelligence. And why can't you program a will? Because its object is precisely the good itself, who is God, right?
Yep.
And only God can give that desire to be known. And that's the first movement of the will. It's even the first movement of the will, which is actually a passion. The radix passion, right? The root passion is this simple willing, like movement toward the good. But even that is preceded by a movement of the intellect, a sight of the good. You can't move towards something as good unless you see it as good, right? And so you can't move towards something that you don't know, because you can't, because we're not the good. We can't program the good, right? I can know a guitar like through and through if I could build one. I could, but I can't. That creature can never extend whatever was in the creator, right? Michelangelo's David can never be greater than Michelangelo envisioned it to be out of that clump of granite. And so you can never program something beyond yourself, which
Yeah.
is why it's a fool's errand to try to create this, uh, like I guess general intelligence, call it artificial or not, but you can't create general intelligence unless you are comprehensively intelligent yourself, unless you are the final good, the truth.
And I think this is an understanding of what creation, like the act of creating something is. Like another philosopher I'll name drop is Giorgio Agamben, and he wrote a short series on creativity. And the idea being that one of the consequences of our kind of technical world of arts, right? We go to a museum to see historic things. We go to an art gallery to look at paintings. That's not a very natural setting, right? Paintings used to be created to be put in, you know, a church, or they would be put in a palace which had a certain occasion or circumstance. Music was written for, military or liturgical or all these kinds of things. Like the world of creativity existed in the world. It wasn't sectioned off and cordoned off into like this is where you go for arts. But one of the consequences of that, he says, is that creative production is seen as purely object level, right? We judge an artist on purely the quality of the art. But this is the unique thing. You mentioned Michelangelo. When you look at David or when you look up at the Sistine Chapel, half the time you don't think about the art, you think about Michelangelo. You're like, who is the man that is capable of doing that? And that's actually a more honest and beautiful concept of creativity. That creative, like the work of creation is the afterbirth of the creator himself. Michelangelo was the man capable of doing both the statue of David and the Sistine Chapel, and he lived that. God is the creator who made all these beautiful things, but he is so much beyond, and everything just points towards him. And we've lost that sense in our own day that when you create something, it is a natural consequence of the life that you live. And if you live it well, and if you have, dwelled in your field and you take it seriously, that passions the work that you do, and it makes it point towards you. But all we live in now is a world of detached objects, where the objects are given priority, where the technical production of the art is given priority. The music is detached from the artist who created it. And that makes us reify these objects. And artificial intelligence is no different. We reify it because we don't ask questions about who's creating it, why they're creating it, and like the nature of that creative act.
And it's almost a perverse, it's a perverse form of art in the arete sense, because the creators don't even intend for it to point back to them. You know, it could be, it's like a perverse humility, but they kind of need to hide, like the little Wizard of Oz guy, right?
Yep.
For it to work. Can you so one more question about the will. If you look at what makes AI work ultimately, and Jensen from NVIDIA just came out and said this, right? But it's kind of, everybody knows it. It's power, 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 like electricity sense. These things need power, like a lot, orders of magnitude more electricity than we've ever used for anything. You know, it's like one of these H100s that sits in a briefcase, really big briefcase, I guess, but uses more power than my house does on a day in a minute. Um, and it seems like if you were to program a final cause into these machines, it would be get as much electricity as I possibly can so that I can keep doing all these other things, right?
Mhm.
So that, I think that could be the Skynet scenario, is you sort of give the grid over to AI for some utilitarian purpose, and then grid grid goes bye-bye.
I think the only thing that comes to mind is Carthage worshipped this god Moloch, where they would sacrifice all their children to it and all their resources. And they lived a purely military life, where all of the goods of life were sacrificed towards this being to just wage war. And it was why the Romans believed that, like, Carthage is so irredeemably evil that it must just
Yes.
be destroyed. Um, what would be the purpose of life if we reoriented all of our electricity towards building such a creature, and we had to sacrifice all the economic goods of anything else to do that?
We
I
are.
Yeah,
We are.
I hope enough that. And recently, Sam Altman submitted a bunch of comments to the U.S. government on AI strategy, which very much were along this kind of thinking, and they were kind of insane, to say the least. Um, I have enough faith that not everyone else has drank the Kool-Aid to believe that that's worth everything. But if you're, especially when you're in the tech world, it's hard to think that anyone hasn't drank that Kool-Aid.
Yeah, there's too much money in it for people to not drink that Kool-Aid. I mean,
Yeah.
Jensen just said, like, the next racks, you should be building data centers for racks that can take 600 kilowatts per rack. I mean, that's just, we've come a long way in 5 years when it was like 20 and 30 to 600 like that. I mean, so the power, the cooling, we don't have enough of it to do what the technologists are demanding.
Hmm.
And but I think, I guess my question is more along the lines of what happens when the machines start needing power and dictating their own power needs. And I mean, it's possible, right? Is that
It is.
crazy?
I think you know what, if, to the degree to which it could have any self-preservation, which I think is even in a non-advanced life form, um, it's just a natural consequence even of speech to
Yes.
identify self-preservation. So they could make those demands, but they can't execute those demands as of yet. And so they require, it's kind of like I'm trying to think of all of these like witching and wizarding stories where, Dracula has like Renfield be someone who prepares the way for him in the promise of like this
Yeah.
internal vampiric life, right? You have a similar kind of thing where the people who are so sold and bought into it are essentially serving it at the expense of their own interests, because they really, really just want to be right. Um,
Yes.
I think the market fluctuations and the political will are such that if they don't deliver practical results in the near term, this funding will not continue forever. Um, I have a strong kind of belief just on it hasn't been like this hasn't been right till now, right? Like OpenAI took off really quickly because actually the practical was an accident for them and they wanted to do the insane godlike stuff. And the accidental practical made them take off because they could recruit engineers aligned to an insane out there vision. Until recently, the ones that had more of a focus on practical goals could not recruit as well as out there visionaries. Now, will things change as all that matters now for most part for the last several years was money? I think DeepSeek has really kind of changed people's perspectives. Um, they didn't really do any kind of technical breakthrough, but they did things cheaply and like nimbly. And that kind of is an inspiration to people who are more, let's say, not motivated by building the most expensive, biggest thing in the world, but ones who want to make money. Now have a way to enter the arena, and there's different incentives there. And the hope is that, you know, actually the capitalist drive kind of, at least in the near term, outweighs the eschatological drive, and that can reallocate capital. At the end of the day, you need people and money to build these things, and it's like, where are the people going and where's the money going? And for years, the money has been going to the most out there stuff. I think we are moving towards a world where the money's going to go to profitable things.
It is, but that's just as dangerous. What does our Lord say? The end times will be marked by, right after peace and prosperity, right? And everybody will be singing peace and prosperity. But how do you get total peace and prosperity? It's when you alleviate, like you said, manual production, manual labor. It's when I know nobody's going to come and steal my sweet potatoes, scientifically, right? And a lot of these things that AI is being built to do could, this is what the AI guys say, right? That we're going to create this peace and prosperity so that everything just works and just gets along. You don't have to lift a finger, and you'll be happy doing other things. But isn't that also the danger that that's the point in which we say, wow, like the beast in Revelation, right? We marvel at what it's done for us. It demands worship. And if we don't, ultimately, we have to play along with this universal commodification, which means we have to become traceable, commodifiable. We have to take some sort of mark on our hand or our forehead. You go to Whole Foods, you could buy an apple right now by scanning your hand, right? I like to say, what can I get for two middle fingers? But these days are coming. They're here, right? Where you become one of these ones and zeros, fit for use or deletion.
And
And
I think, but that's the I know it's not a more optimistic take, but in some sense, it's more optimistic in the sense of that fight is a fight that we've been having for a few hundred years at least. The domain of commodification and the domain of capitalism running everything is one that's more well studied.
absolutely, since industrial revolution and
Yeah.
before that, since wage slavery was invented, we're becoming commodified.
Yeah, and those are things where it's at least there are traditional tactics to resist, whereas the world of uh, dealing with the reification of science itself. Um, this is another thing that we've noticed in the last kind of decade or so is that the interests of the economy and the interests of like science and technology are no longer aligned. All right. And in some ways, the worship of science and technology is much more pernicious than the worship of the economy. And we don't know how to deal with that as easily. Um, so I'd rather the devil I know than the devil that I don't, right?
It's a fair point. Either way, the devil's here, though.
Yes, yeah.
So I think, just to wrap up, and I know we got to go here, but how should a Catholic respond to this emerging technology, both corporately, politically, socially? Uh, it's here to stay. It's fair to say that, the Amish option is not an option, right? We got to deal with it. We got to engage it. What should people like me be doing to do the best we can to help be a voice to navigate this according to the common good?
There's so many different ways that I see involvement. The first is, and there's already initiatives, like the fact that we were at the Pontifical Academy to discuss these things, and there's an interest in digitizing the Vatican archives, and there's investments of tools to make that content more accessible. Like presence is very important now, right? Like everything that you see is mediated by an algorithm. People don't go to libraries and pick up books anymore. So unless you do something to be able to be present on those platforms and in those medium, your voice is not going to be heard. So I'm glad that there are initiatives to make Catholic information more accessible. And that also makes it more accessible to building tools that are aligned with our views. And so there has to be investment in building tools. Like the work
I don't
done
know
at
if that's the case. Let me just
yeah,
be contrarian here, just
yeah.
real quick. I'm gonna throw out a wild theory. I'm opposed to digitizing the Vatican archives in the same way that Christopher Nolan is opposed to moving all movies to streaming only and not physical medium, Blu-ray. And I'm not saying that those are exclusive of each other. I get it. You can still have books and have digitization. But if there are still Marxist junior colleges in 300 years, they're going to be talking about how Christopher Nolan wanted to keep all of his movies under lock and key at the Blockbuster Video and not give them to the people, right? But the problem is, as soon as they're completely digitized, then they're not really preservable, and they're I mean, I don't want to get too crazy out there, right, or in the weeds about they're deletable. They're deletable. Anything that you digitize is deletable.
Sure. And no one's saying that you don't
I
keep,
know,
right?
I
But
know, but that's how it starts, Ryan.
in
That
some sense, it's the risk of having everything in one place is more deletable, right? The ISIS has destroyed so many of the
it's
Eastern
true. I
right?
know. I
And
know.
they can't be recovered. So that's
I
one,
know.
like, I think
Yep.
one level. But the other, and I think this is where Catholics need to feel that they have like a kind of practical voice in the field. Often, and this is a natural temptation, but people separate their faith and their work. Um,
Mm.
and we're called not to, right? You as a Catholic work in a technical field, I as a Catholic work in a technical field, and actually our faith shapes the way that we perceive these fields. The philosophical language of the Catholic tradition has an understanding of what it means to pursue truth that everyone outside of our tradition is struggling with. To most people, right, what's true is whatever's useful, whatever we all agree on, and then they can't comprehend why these tools hallucinate or they give them answers that are wrong. It's because truth is not this utilitarian thing, right? We know that
Right.
truth is a person and a relationship with that person, and it orders the whole of our life. And the more you live and work and embed that understanding of truth into what you do, the more you can orient things well. And I think there has been this separation of our ideals from our practical dealings for a long time. But that needs to be kind of resisted and dealt with to be lights to the world.
Yeah, that's good. And I think I take it back. I'm all for digitizing the Vatican archives. Just keep them under lock and key. Also,
Yes.
very important. Cover your bases, church. But it's what I mean. Like
Yeah.
it's just kind of you don't get the same glory from reading an ebook that you do a smelly old calfskin
Oh, of course.
first edition. You know what I mean? There's something to that. So anyway, Ryan, I could talk to you for a really long time. I mean, I'm just so glad you were willing to come on this thing, and hopefully 20 people listen to it and enjoy it and share it. And where can people find you, support your work, and maybe invite you to speak? I mean, I think I'd like to sit in a crowd and listen to you talk about stuff.
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest place to get in touch. I've written a lot of things about AI for Palladium magazine, but you just Google my name as well. There's a lot of things that show up.
Ryan Khurana, Khurana. Really an honor to speak to you. When you're in California next time, I'd love to get together in person and maybe have a follow-up conversation over some beers with some microphones in the room.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me, John.
Ryan, thank you. And for the Magnus podcast and Albertus Magnus Institute, please check out magnusinstitute.org. Jump in a new class. I think we have a round starting here very, very soon. Join a new cohort. Last year's cohort filled up, and this one will too. So don't be left out in the cold. It's a great thing to do. magnusinstitute.org for more. Ryan Khurana.